All right, what's going on? I'm Bobby Skinner talking Giants, and unfortunately, I am making a video on why I think the Giants should fire Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll as well. I really didn't want to, be making this video when the Giants hired these guys a few years ago, and I definitely didn't think I'd be doing it after they went to the playoffs their first year and won a playoff game. But unfortunately, I think the Giants are in a situation where the GM has not done a good job, and I don't think this offseason he's going to be in a spot to be a good GM. He could get it right, but I don't think he's going to be in a spot to be a good GM. Now, before I get into this video, I try to err on the side of patience, right? I am not looking to just fire people because I'm angry that they're losing or for the sake of firing. And I also I didn't disagree with all of these decisions in the moment. I also would have drafted Kayvon Thibodeau. I would have not bid against myself in signing Daniel Jones, but I would have paid him up to $36 million per year, which is based off of a study I did on cap percentage for non-elite quarterbacks. But this is a question of how has the GM done in 3 years? Process is prerequisite, results matter. What's the main reason that I want Joe Schoen fired? And Joe Schoen is the biggest focus of this video. Brian Daboll is going to talk about, but the main focus is Joe Schoen. The main reason I think he's put together a bad roster, and I don't see this roster turning around either. Can they turn around if they get a great quarterback? Absolutely. But Joe Schoen has not proven why he deserves the opportunity with 3 years of roster building and mishandling of the QB position to be the guy for that. And what is the main reason for the bad roster? There's multiple, and we're going to go through all of them. But the main reason is the NFL draft. Let's look at his first draft class in 2022, where it all starts. You have 2 picks in the top 7. Your first pick, 5th overall, Kayvon Thibodeau. He's a good player, but he's not good for the 5th overall pick. 7th overall pick, you draft Evan Neal. He's a complete bust. Wandale Robinson in the high second round, you're not really getting your money's worth at pick 42 with Wandale Robinson. Josh Azudu, early third rounder, bust. Cordell Flott, not good. And then you get into day 3. Daniel Bellinger's a third string tight end right now. Dane Belton in the fourth round, backup and bad when he plays. Micah McFadden in the 5th round, that's a good draft pick. Absolutely. But he's also a limited player, right? The league is not looking at how did this guy fall to the 5th round. They're looking at him as a value 5th round pick. He's limiting coverage, but he's a good draft pick. DJ Davidson in the 5th round, bad. Marcus McKeith in the 5th round, he's completely gone. Darian Beavers in the 6th round, they're completely gone. Obviously, I don't hold day 3 picks too much against you, but I'm looking for hits. They had all those picks and so many holes, and I talked about it on my annual draft day speech that I give about team building. And you never look back on a draft and think, thank God we filled the need for safety. Or do you look back at drafts and say, damn, look at that good player. Look at that good player that great player in the 1st round and that good player in the 3rd round and that guy that I really liked who contributed in the 5th round. That's what you look back at. And they had 11 draft picks and they drafted for need. Joe Schoen has said it publicly, we needed to fill spots. Your first draft going into fill spots when you have all the grace in the world, you should be looking to get good players that when I'm recording videos on this date 3 years later, I'm talking about good players and not needs. So let's go into his next draft class, the 2023 class. In the 1st round, Deonte Banks. He's bad, looking like a bust of a 1st round pick. John Michael Schmitz in the 2nd round, below average center. Jalen Hyatt in the 3rd round. He's a one-trick pony who hasn't been able to even do that. He contributes negatively when he's on the field. In the 5th round, Eric Gray, a 3rd-string running back with a fumble problem. 6th round, Trey Hawkins. He's been healthy and active all year into this last game, where he just showed some flashes, but he got injured for the season. Jordan Riley, who's been healthy and active all season. And then Javarius Owens in the 7th round as well, who's gone. So you traded a 5th and a 7th to trade up 1 spot for Deonte Banks, who has been bad. You traded a 4th for Jalen Hyatt. You went into a draft without a center on the roster outside of a practice squad player with 7 starts and didn't even make your roster in J.C. Hassenauer. You let John Feliciano go to the 49ers for $2.5 million. That's a bad draft. That's putting yourself in a bad situation where you had to come out of this draft with a center no matter what. You traded up for a corner who hasn't been good, and you traded up for a wide receiver who's useless, who's basically useless on the field. Now, the 2024 draft is his pride point, but we will discuss that later on in the video. The next thing that people will talk about when it comes to Joe Schoen is paying Daniel Jones. The thing that everyone looks at right now is the decision to pay Daniel Jones $40 million per year. Not only did they re-sign Daniel Jones, but they bid against themselves because Joe Schoen declared after the season that he would be back. So you set a new standard for middle-tier QBs getting paid, not just by dollar amount, but by cap percentage compared to guys like Dak, Tannehill, Alex Smith, who frankly had a lot better success in the NFL than Daniel Jones. And he set a new standard when it comes to your percentage of the cap with Daniel Jones. Now, they did sign Daniel Jones with a way of getting out in 2 years. But the questions that we had on Daniel Jones from the outside, like they should have known these. They had the least of the excuses because they worked with him every day. They knew what the limitations were when we wondered if they lacked a deep threat outside of Slayton, who they tried to trade for a 5th-round pick, by the way, that offseason, or because of the issues on the O-line. Like on the podcast where they signed him, or a pending free agent pod, I can't remember, I talked about questions of why the playbook was so limited. The playbook was extremely limited, but Daniel Jones operated extremely well. But the question, why was it limited? Was it because of mainly Daniel Jones? Was it the wide receivers? Was it the offensive line? And we got our answers, We got our answers in that. Here is when you ask me overall, like, what's my best example of why I don't think Joe Schoen should be the GM going forward? Give me your Giants' top 10 players in year 3 of Joe Schoen as GM. And this is my opinion. You can make your own. But the point will still stand even if we differ on what our 6 through 10 is. Like, I want to see how the roster is. So the 2 big things that everyone looks at are the first 2 draft classes, the Daniel Jones contract, and the third, outside of the bad record, is the players who have left, like Saquon Barkley, Xavier McKinney, Julian Love, Leonard Williams, and others. But I'm not going to kill him on all of those. Some, but not all. I just want to see, how is the roster? 3 years in, how is the roster? Let's look at the top 10 players on the roster. That should paint a good picture of what we have. Number 1, Dexter Lawrence, a Dave Gettleman draft pick. Number 2, Andrew Thomas, a Dave Gettleman draft pick. Number 3, Malik Neighbors, Joe Schoen draft. Number 4, Brian Burns, a Schoen trade. Bobby Okereke, Schoen free agency. Kayvon Thibodeau, Schoen draft. Darius Slayton is my number 7, Gettleman draft. Jermaine Illuminor, Schoen free agency at number 8. Tyrone Tracy is my number 9, Schoen draft. And then Wan'Dale Robinson is my 10 with the Schoen draft. This is the nail in the coffin for me. Out of your 5 best players, 1 is your draft pick in 3 years. Out of the top 10, only 4 are like really good, and there's like a great drop off after Okereke and Kayvon. Like, let's look at some examples of top 10 players on a roster 3 years in. Let's look at the Lions last year. Like, let's look at the example. The Lions. I don't know the perfect order, but I'm going to just list off 11 players. Penei Sewell, Aiden Hutchinson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, Brian Branch, Frank Ragnow, David Montgomery, Taylor Decker, Sam Laporta, Jared Goff, Jonah Jackson. Right? That's 11 really good players. Like, all 11 of those players would be in the Giants' top 5. All 11. All 11. Now let's look at another roster that was, Ryan Poles was hired at the same time as Joe Schoen. Let's look at the Bears roster in 3 years, and they're a bad team, by the way. They're a really bad team. Jalen Johnson, DJ Moore, Montez Sweat, TJ Edwards, Darnell Wright, Tremaine Edmonds, Keenan Allen, Kevin Byard, Kyler Gordon, Gervon Dexter, Cole Kmet. That's 11. That's a lot better. And that doesn't include Caleb Williams or Rome Odunze, who have had slow starts to their career. And there's other players on that roster that I like a lot more than what the Giants have done with their picks. Like, I like Tyreek Stevenson in the 2nd round a lot more than Deonte Banks in the 1st round. So you're going to have to use more than the 2024 draft class to persuade me why he should keep his job. And I do feel better about this class in season and before the season than I did his other draft classes. But let's look at it. I mean, Malik Neighbors is a stud, no doubt. Tyrone Tracy is a hit already. I'm ready to declare that. But you're going to have to show me what Tyler Nubin, Drew Phillips, or Theo Johnson have done to give you more confidence than what you had last year and Deonte Banks or Jalen Hyatt 1 year ago. Think to yourself and be honest about how you felt about those picks 1 year ago today. You probably felt really good about that. So again, Malik Neighbors is a stud. Tyler Nubin has 1 pass breakup and 0 interceptions in his first season. There's 59 safeties in the NFL with at least 2 pass breakups. There's 57 safeties who have at least 1 interception in the NFL this year. He's been a good run defender, and I think the coverage will come along eventually. But you can't use him right now as your big reason to bring Joe Schoen back. Andrew Phillips, he's had some awesome moments this year. He's made really good plays in the run game from the nickel spot. He's also given up 84% of targets, has 0 pass breakups, 0 interceptions. He's missed some big open field tackles that have led to points for the other team. You overlook it as a rookie right now because you want to. But if this happens in year 2, you'll crucify him. Right? And I like Drew Phillips. There's really good signs there. But I'm not ready to be that. That's the reason why I'm keeping a GM. And if you want to tell me about his PFF grade, that's fine. But then you have to tell me about Tyler Nubin's being 5th out of 9 rookies at safety position and 36 overall. Theo Johnson was their starting tight end, but he's 43rd of 46 in yards per route run for tight ends this year. I like his upside. You know, he was my personal tight end too in this class after Brock Bowers, but I need more than 330 yards and 1 touchdown to celebrate you as a win. Tyrone Tracy has been really refreshing, and that is a flat-out hit to me. I don't need to see a second year to declare that a hit. You know, he only has 109 rushing yards in the last 3 games, but he's been averaging 5 yards per carry behind a subpar O-line. His yards as a starter come out to a 1,200-yard rushing season. He's been awesome. Darius Moasow, he's been awful, but he's a 6th-round pick, so whatever. Leading the team in interceptions. But you're always going to be higher on your rookie class because the roster is so bad that 5 of the 6 are essentially day 1 starters because the roster is bad. Also, I think if you're using his year 3 as this great example, 1 year does not make you a good GM. Let's look at Dave Gettleman's year 3. And this is not a defense of Dave Gettleman. Like, he should have been fired after year 2 and year 3, but his year 3 stacks up pretty damn good. You had Andrew Thomas and Xavier McKinney at the top. That's a damn good 1st and 2nd round. We look back and don't like these players, but in the moment, Darnay Holmes was a starter, didn't give up a touchdown his rookie year. Shane Lemieux was a good run blocker starter. Tay Crowder, Mr. Irrelevant, was a starting linebacker. Carter Coughlin and Cam Brown were special teamers who lasted their whole contracts. You know, and even his free agents were bargains in top of the class. James Bradbury had like an all-pro type of year. Blake Martinez had his best career, and he was, you know, the 3rd highest paid linebacker in that class. That was a maligned move, and he did well. Logan Ryan, and even like the bargain deals like Kyler Fackrell and Cam Fleming even did the job that they were brought in to do. So again, list your top 10 players on the team and look how they got there. Now, after 3 seasons, 25 draft picks, 3 years of free agent signings and trades, tell me of the best 10 players, which did Joe Schoen bring in? Malik Neighbors, Brian Burns, Bobby Okereke, Kayvon Thibodeau, Jermaine Illuminor, Tyrone Tracy, and Wan'Dale Robinson. Have these guys even lived up to the expectations that come with their acquisition? Neighbors, 6 overall? Absolutely. Burns, maybe, but that the whole thing is a bigger picture worth talking about. Okereke has been disappointing in year 2. Kayvon hasn't played like a top 5 pick. Illuminor has been a great value signing. Tracy over-exceeding his. Wan'Dale's a high 2nd round pick is doing nothing to say that draft selection was great. So tell me what Joe Schoen has done to deserve a year 4. To force a QB in what's viewed as a bad QB draft because you want to see Brian Daboll work with him. You either build a good roster or you get the QB who gives you time to build a good roster. If you build a good roster or legit signs of it, you get the patience of the fan base or owner because you can point to it and say flat out, look at what he has done with talent acquisition. But obviously he needs to get the quarterback. Or if you got the franchise quarterback, you get grace for the rest of things because you did the hardest thing to do in the NFL GMing. You found the QB. That QB also lifts up other players and you win more games. But you don't get flowers for modernizing the building and having good process. And I don't think he even has good process anyways. I think it's mediocre process, but it looks good because it's following Dave Gettleman and Jerry Reese. So let's talk about process and all this. Here's some examples of bad process. He went into the 2023 draft without a center on the roster, while John Feliciano got 1 year, $2.5 million. Your starting center got the previous year got $2.5 million. You couldn't bring that in to keep him. You totally drafted for need in 2022, and you admitted to it in press conferences on Hard Knocks. I hate drafting for need so much. You see on the Hard Knocks that he's torn with Kool-Aid and Lassiter in 2024 second round, and he looks distraught when they're not there. And I understand wanting to get your guys, but it was because of the position they played. When he's stressing, there's guys like Johnny Newton, Jackson Powers Johnson, Braden Frisk on the board at the same time, but he's paying no attention to them because he knows he needs a quarterback. He bid against himself in the Daniel Jones contract instead of letting him, see what other offers were out there. I won't use this, but people say he drafted Banks for Wink and signed Okereke for Wink as a defense. But if you're using premium capital for the most specific defensive coordinator in the NFL, outside of Brian Flores, I think you're insane. He's drafted outliers like Wan'Dale Robinson, who was 1 percentile in size, and Cordell Flott at 160 pounds on day 2. I don't think he values depth. Thank God nobody signed Greg Van Roten. Their O-line plan coming into this season was insanity. So tell me what the great process is. Not paying a running back? Congrats. You're like everybody on Twitter. And I think there is good examples of process. So I do want to, show what I think Joe Schoen has done well. I think the best example is trades. and you look at the trades and you like how he's done it. Doesn't overpay and doesn't sell for low for anything. Like, you might want a 6th-round pick for Azeez Ojulari right now and complain when he walks in free agency, but having that hardline stance is how you get a 2nd and 5th for Leonard Williams. You sold early on a guy like Kadarius Toney, but let's go through it one by one. In 2022, he dropped down from pick 36 to 38, and then added a 5th-round pick that got you Micah McFadden. Like that. Then he dropped back 5 spots to pick 43 again, drafted Wan'Dale Robinson, and picked Dane Belton. Don't like the results, but kind of, like getting a 4th-round pick for dropping 5 spots. Then you trade Kadarius Toney early for a 3rd-round pick and then a 6th-round pick that turned into Trey Hawkins. That's a great trade. Then you traded for Darren Waller. I don't hate the trade in theory. Darren Waller had no dead cap at the time. Obviously, you couldn't predict him being retired. You could predict him being injured. That was part of the process with Darren Waller, but don't hate that. The 2 worst ones, in my opinion, are the 2023 draft trades. Trading your 1st, 5th, and 7th to move up 1 spot for Deonte Banks when you had guys like Joey Porter Jr. on the board. Trading up for Jalen Hyatt, 16 spots in the 4th round. That's obviously rent really bad. And then the other trades. Traded a 7th for Isaiah Simmons. That's a good deal in my mind. He's been a useful player. Not a great player, but a useful player. Did a 6th and 7th pick swap for Boogie Basham. That's a bad trade, but it's literally the lowest stakes possible. Leonard Williams for a 2nd and a 5th. That's a great trade. Traded a 2nd, a 5th, and a 5th-round pick swap for Brian Burns. I want to talk about the whole Brian Burns thing, but that's good value for a Brian Burns player. And then traded Jordan Phillips and a 7th for a 6th-round pick in 2026. So I think he's been a good trader. Even moves that didn't work out, they look good on paper. I didn't like the Banks trade in person. The Basham trade is not a big deal. Or in real time, Basham trade is not a big deal. The other thing people will say is the cap situation. He took his medicine in 2020, and the only contracts that weren't minimum deals they gave out were Mark Lewinsky, Tyrod Taylor, and John Feliciano. Did Lewinsky play well? No, but he didn't sacrifice the future to make that team better. But here's the thing, is 2023, they signed Daniel Jones, and they traded Daniel for Darren Waller, which led to the departures of Xavier McKinney, Saquon Barkley, Julian Love, and others. So is the cap in a decent spot now? Yes, but that's because you let guys walk that you wouldn't have if you didn't re-sign Daniel Jones and quote-unquote expedite the process by trading for Darren Waller, using Julian Love money on Paris Campbell, and then signing Daniel Jones. So I think he's done a good job not just destroying the cap, but that's because you let guys walk because of your QB contract. But I do think he's been overall smart in free agency, and I think that's how. I love the Jermaine Illuminor contract. Got good value on Bobby Okereke when linebackers were getting some bigger contracts. Runyon has been serviceable. Ashawn Robinson was a good player for them. Good gap plugs like Greg Van Roten, John Feliciano, and Fabian Moreau. Now, some that haven't worked out, like Mark Lewinsky, Paris Campbell, trading for Waller, Drew Lock, but nothing that's really crippling them in the future. But part of not crippling them is not valuing depth, especially on the O-line. And that's how you have what happened to them in early 2023, where you had nobodies out there. Not having a swing offensive tackle and putting Josh Suzuki out there. That to me is malpractice when you know how important the left tackle is to your success in Andrew Thomas. But overall, I have liked the free agent process of not looking for it to completely rehaul your team, but to add plus players. All right, got to pay the bills. Stick with me. Grab your favorite team's jersey, Big Blue, and some snacks, and head to the couch for another Sunday of action-packed football, and then get even closer to the action each Sunday with our partners at the DraftKings Sportsbook. Right now, all new customers who bet just $5 will get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins when you use code WORLD. Staying on the action, you use your $150 in bonus bets on DraftKings same-game parlays for a shot at an even bigger payout. And if sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. Stop freaking out. Stop worrying, damn it. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. So support this video. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use promo code WORLD. Bet just $5 on any wager and get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. That's promo code WORLD only at the DraftKings Sportsbook. You'll be glad you did. All right, back with some other good process I like, but this part I'm worried about is the 2024 QB draft, right? They did not force quarterback, But they also tried to trade up for a quarterback that they believed in with Drake May, who I would have loved to trade up for him, was hoping that they'd get the opportunity. They didn't get that opportunity. That's a good process to me, right? Seeing quarterbacks you evaluate as franchise quarterbacks, doing what you can to try and get them. If you don't evaluate a quarterback as a franchise quarterback like McCarthy, Nix, or Penix, then you don't draft them, right? That's a good process to me. The issue is that process that led to that is out the window. They are in a position where they're drafting a quarterback no matter what. They will, like, if Joe Schoen is the GM and the Giants have a top 2 pick, they're drafting a quarterback no matter what their actual evaluation of that player is. Like, the question is, if McCarthy was still in this year's draft, would they draft him? Because if the answer is yes, well, now their process sucks. People will also use stuff like, well, they draft premium positions early. I guess that is a good process, but in 3 years, your day 1 and 2 picks has turned into Kayvon, Evan Neal, Wan'Dale Robinson, Josh Azudu, Cordell Flott, Deontay Banks, John Michael Schmitz, Jalen Hyatt, Malik Neighbors, Tyler Newman, Andrew Phillips. That's one current Pro Bowl level player and Malik Neighbors, and your day 3 hasn't blossomed to anything yet outside of Tyrone Trace and Micah McFadden. So you drafted 3 O-line, 3 wide receivers, 2 corners, an edge, and a safety. But what has that turned into? Now, this is another thing people will hit Joe Schoen, and it works hand in hand with the Daniel Jones contract, is letting guys walk. He let Saquon, Xavier McKinney, Leonard Williams, and Julian Love go. Saquon Barkley, I agree with, and I still do. And I'm not anti-pay running back, but the Giants were investing into the run game with Saquon, and they just weren't getting the results needed. Plus, he got injured almost every year. The Giants' run game is much better this year after investing in the offensive line. Leonard Williams for a 2nd and 5th, I'm good with that. Julian Love, 2 years for $12 million. You cut Logan Ryan, as one of your first moves that you did, and you actually lost caps. You had no cap space, and you lost cap space when you cut Logan Ryan because you believed in him, and he played, and Julian Love played well. And maybe the argument for that was, like, well, we want to pay Xavier McKinney, so you don't want to pay 2 safeties, which I think is a bad argument. But here's the thing. You didn't pay Xavier McKinney. And that's my biggest issue. That's the big one with the letting guys walk. Xavier McKinney is they should have not let walk. You let a 24-year-old, homegrown, top-of-his-position player walk when you did not have to at all. You could have brought in Brian Burns and kept Xavier McKinney. Keeping Xavier McKinney is building through the draft, and you have a QB who will come off the books and no big contracts coming up the pike, so you shouldn't have to make these decisions to let a guy top of his position walk. Like, his cap hit this year is $7 million. I can come up with 20 different ways that they could have paid him this year. So you lose a 2nd and a 5th round pick while spending $30 million on Brian Burns. Then you use your other 2nd round pick on a safety, which you still could have done. You still could have drafted Tyler Nubin and kept Xavier McKinney. It's not a sin to have a good safety duo in the NFL. Now, I want to kill some arguments for them. And this is the argument that Joe Schoen made in his bye-week press conference. And it's the one that I've seen used the most when it comes to Joe Schoen. Are they close or a quarterback away? So, first, don't talk to me about one-score games. Using losses and one-score games to justify anything to me is silly and dumb. Yes, a good QB can mask a bad roster and win you games. But let's look at the roster and stop sliding in a QB1 that we don't even know exists. You also assume so much when you do that. You assume that good QB has no bad or mediocre games. You assume nothing happens differently from the other team based off of a more competitive game. You have the 28th worst point differential in the NFL. Right? The more one-score games in NFL history than ever this year. The 2020 Joe Judge Giants went 6-10. They lost 5 one-score games. Was that a good roster? 2019, they went 4-12. The Giants lost 5 one-score games. Was that a good roster? 2018, they went 5-11. They lost 8 one-score games. Was that a good roster? And then the whole quarterback away. And the example of this will be the Houston Texans and the Washington Commanders. An example of how a good QB saves you. Which is true. But what it doesn't mean is those teams did a good job of building the roster in the 3 years prior leading up to that. It's honestly more of an example of why you should reset GM and head coach with the QB, unlike the Chicago Bears did with Caleb Williams. If you land a franchise QB, it will cover up a lot of holes on the roster. It'll make other decisions look better too. It's the best thing you can do as a GM. And it's also the hardest thing to do as a GM. Why are we granting Joe Schoen, who talked about protecting themselves with Drew Lock, as doing that? I agreed with his 2024 QB draft evaluation, but what if he doesn't view of any of these QBs as a franchise QB? So he'll totally go away from his philosophy to save his job? So why are we selling him on being here because it looks better if he does the hardest thing to do in the NFL GM? Like, oh, he'd at least look like a decent NFL GM if he did the hardest thing possible to do. Like, what from giving Daniel Jones $82 million guaranteed to giving Drew Lock $5 million shows you that he's going to get the quarterback right while desperate? Also, the Commanders were more than a QB away. The Commanders added a new GM, head coach, both coordinators. They brought in a new QB with Jaden Daniels, a running back 2 in Austin Eckler, tight end 1 and 2, left tackle, left guard, center, right tackle, 2 starting edges, 2 starting linebackers, a nickel corner, and a safety. Oh, by the way, they also traded for Marshawn Lattimore, so an outside corner. Let's add that to the list. They also didn't draft for need and added a defensive tackle and a tight end in the second rounds when defensive tackle was the strongest spot on the team. They're also the 7th seed in the NFC, 1 game up on the 8th seed while playing a last place schedule. So yes, do I like what the Commanders are doing? Yes. Would I trade that situation to have the franchise QB? Yes. But let's not act like a franchise QB makes you makes your rest of your roster great. Also, I think he doesn't take depth seriously. You know, even if this team is a QB away with their starters, the depth is awful. Like, what positions do you like the first backup at in their spot? Devin Singletary? Aziz, who will probably be gone? Daniel Bellinger? And then another argument for Joe Schoen, like, oh, well, the O-line looked really good. Yes, but it was predicated on Andrew Thomas, the Dave Gettleman draft pick, and it still wasn't a good run-blocking unit. So much was predicated on Andrew Thomas winning one-on-ones. Myles Garrett got his first ever time where he didn't get double-team help because of Andrew Thomas. I also want to go back and look at the depth point of this, right? Like, Jermaine Eluemunor has been a really good signing so far. John Runyon, an okay signing. Thank God they brought Greg Van Roten in after all season pretending Neal was going to start and you had Jermaine Eluemunor guard. Like, that was an awful offensive line plan. And all this after you failed with Neal, Azudu, McKeith, and JMS and Glowinski. And then here's like talking about like, okay, well, they draft a quarterback. What are they going to do in 2025 free agency? Is Joe Schoen going to go on a spending spree this offseason? Like, part of the issue of letting Gettleman get a year 4 is how badly it hurt the cap. The Giants have $58 million in cap space, but they also have to fill out the roster. They're in a good spot, but not in a spot to be in a spending spree, partly due to Jones's $20 million cap hit on the books for 2025. Are we going to let them go big game hunting and backload a bunch of deals in his pursuit to keep a job? And maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, but how do you avoid that? Are you going to have John Mara tell him what he can and can't do in free agency? That's a bad decision. And then the next argument I want to kill is, well, you can't keep cycling through GM and head coach. And I agree, I would like to be patient, especially with the head coach. But the reason why they've cycled through so many head coaches is because of their patience with the GM spot when they had shown to be bad GMs. Jerry Reese had 11 years, obviously won the 2 Super Bowls, but his ending was awful draft-wise. Worse than Dave Gettleman or Joe Schoen. So you fired Tom Coughlin instead of firing both. You kept the organization the exact same by firing Coughlin and promoting McAdoo with no other changes than that, and ended up firing him in 2 years because you didn't restart after 2015. So then you hire Dave Gettleman and Pat Shurmur. Fresh start, even though Gettleman is actually just part of the old guard. Dave Gettleman feels the heat, so he recommends you fire Pat Shurmur to save his job, and John Mara fell for that. You know, John Mara saw Pat Shurmur do good things with their first-round QB that Gettleman gave credit for really drafting, who had a defensive roster whose best 3 players were Janoris Jenkins and year 3 Dalvin Tomlinson and Jabril Peppers. So you fall for that, then you hire Joe Judge, who you have to fire because the GM you should have fired twice already retires and is fired, and nobody wants to join a year 3 head coach with 10 wins to be the GM with no cap space because of the year 3 spending. So they have not cycled through GMs quickly. Just head coaches who are given bad rosters by bad GMs who got way too much patience. So that's my argument for Joe Schoen. Now, we also have to talk about the Brian Daboll part of this. So with Brian Daboll, Mike Kafka is going to leave after the season, most likely. Shane Bowen has not been a good defensive coordinator, but you couldn't fire him if you wanted to because no one is going to want to join you at this point. They were already turned down by your top candidates for defensive coordinator this past offseason. So, like, OC, they're going to have to promote. Like, you're too worried about optics last year and didn't let Kafka go because of it. So now you'll be forced to promote Shea Tierney to OC position, or you'll have to wait and have a person after person turn you down, just like the the defensive coordinator hiring cycle last year. Brian Daboll also, like, I think some of his negatives is he's a head coach who is very reactionary in his ways instead of being stoic and believing in his process. He's flip-flopped QBs multiple times now. Kept Tommy DeVito in over Tyrod Taylor despite Taylor being clearly the better player, and then ruined the relationship there. Then you bench DeVito 2.5 starters after that for the final 2 games for Tyrod, so you can't use development as an excuse. Then when you decide to bench Daniel Jones, you skip over Drew Lock for Tommy DeVito. You plan to start DeVito again. He's hurt, and you decide Lock is the starter over DeVito after a bad and worse 2 games. When it comes to in-game aggression, you're very passive, but also let one failure stop future aggression when the entire point of being aggressive is that it averages out to a positive, even though you'll fail at times. Like, no matter what you feel about 4th down, the whole thing about going for a 4th down is like, hey, if you miss 1, it'll average out. Or, the down by 14, score touchdown, go for 2, that philosophy. Brian Daboll subscribed to it against the Steelers. It didn't work, and then had the same opportunity against the Cowboys and kicked the extra point. So I'm not here to debate that or say which philosophy is right, but you'll always get crushed by media fans when something doesn't work, but at least believe in something instead of being wishy-washy based off of a fan reaction. And there is questions from staff and players if he's a leader of men overall, but I don't want to dive too deep into that until there's more out there. And listen, I don't hate Brian Daboll, and I think he's been mostly hamstrung by a bad roster, but don't think he's done near enough to keep his job if they fire the GM. I watch the tape, bro, and I see good schematics and tendency changers, and more so lately in the season, but I see good spacing in their concepts and opportunities for explosives. He was the head coach and won Coach of the Year and had the Giants' most successful season since Super Bowl 46. The play callers aren't there anymore from that season, but he did do a good job. They changed their offensive identity multiple times that season because they had schematic advantages, but teams would catch on because their talent wasn't good. He changed their entire identity. Like, that's a pliable coach, and I do really like that. They started that season more wide open in their passing game. After 3 weeks, moved to a heavy under-center run game and play action attack. And then around week 14, teams were catching on to that. So the last 4 games, they were, they went 0-3-1. They switched to 11 personnel shotgun quick game offense, getting Saquon more involved in the passing game and shotgun rushing attack, and finished the regular season 2-2, won a playoff game and averaged 24 points per game in that stretch with your starters. But what I don't see is an attention to detail, and that starts with their lack of practicing the fundamentals in practice. But would a really good QB look really good with Brian Daboll? Yes, absolutely. Would a really good QB cover up Joe Schoen's bad roster building? Yes. But Schoen and Daboll haven't done good enough to show me why they deserve the shot at finding the really good QB, which again is the hardest thing to do in team building. Here's the thing. The worst case scenario is if John Mara lets Joe Schoen stay and Brian Daboll be fired. Brian Daboll's done a better job than Joe Schoen. You can't fire Joe Schoen and then keep Brian Daboll. He hasn't done enough because no GM's going to want to join that mess. So to me, this is why the focus is Joe Schoen. I think he's the main issue, but Brian Daboll has to go with it. And I understand the John Mara part of it all. The reality is that he's not going anywhere, and there's not much we can do about it. I think it's an issue, and it makes me feel bad about the future of this team, right? I don't believe that you just fire these guys and everything's fixed. The hope, though, is that you get a good GM and head coach who do well in their first 2 to 3 years to give them the confidence to rehaul this thing from the inside out. There's way too many people in that building who have been there 10-plus years on a bottom 3 franchise, who have survived 3 GMs and 5 head coaches. Chris Mara isn't doing much, but he's still part of big decisions. We all know how hard it is, to be in the same room with him and flesh things out, knowing the owner's brother is in the room when he shouldn't be. The bigger issue to me is Tim McDonald, who has been there the last 12 years while the team has been awful, but somehow he's been promoted twice to now being the director of player personnel. How has this very young person been promoted to this huge position? Oh, he's John Mara's nephew. Definitely no nepotism there. Whenever you see them out, it's Joe Schoen, Brandon Brown, and Tim McDonald. So does the GM of the Giants come with challenges that make it tougher than other spots? Absolutely. Do you have an owner who gives you his opinion on roster construction? Absolutely. But he doesn't override the GM when it comes to decisions, and we saw that play out on Hard Knocks with Saquon Barkley. In reality, you need to draft and sign well. Get the QB, and then the owner's recommendation doesn't mean all that much because your results are your job security. If Joe Schoen's first 2 draft classes didn't suck, we wouldn't be talking about John Mara. So in conclusion, I want the Giants to fire Joe Schoen, and unfortunately for Brian Daboll, he has to go with him. You can't do a GM search with a head coach whose favorability polls will be sub 40% at the end of the season. We can talk about a million things, and I just did, but the bottom line is that I don't think he has built a good roster, And now he's going to be desperate. That's just a dangerous cocktail that I'm not drinking. Like I just read a whole basically script and notes, and I want to finish off with a little bit of just talk. Like, I think he's done a bad job building this roster. I think this roster is bad, and I think it's mostly because of him. Did the last GM set him up for amazing success? No. But what GM that gets fired does. And you see teams turn it around. It'd be one thing if they were close. I don't think they're close. They're going to finish the season 2-15 most likely. 2-15. That's not close in year 3. Show me the examples of a team being that bad in year 3 of a regime and turning it around. Like Joe Schoen has done, like John Mayer has done, you're looking for the outlier. I never want to be looking for the outlier. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know your opinions. Like and subscribe. Share. I put this out with a month left in the season. This is going to be my reference point. I know it's long, but I want to do a really good job on it. So appreciate you guys very much. We'll see you on the podcast. Check us out. We do film reviews, not as much with the season sucking, but do draft previews. So we'll have full breakdowns of the Shedeur Sanders and Cam Wards in this draft. We do interviews with reporters. So if you're new, first time watching, check us out. I think we are the #1 spot for Giants coverage. Appreciate you. See you guys on the next one. Until then, let's go Big Blue.